By now we should have gained altitude. But we are still struggling on the ground. Let me read out something for you. And please, if you can tell me the answer, I will give you $1 million. Just be a man. But if you give me a wrong answer, you'll give me $2 million. Well, we agree. Let me now listen very carefully. The quotation reads, "I bow and tremble before you, Father of national unity, who made sure that your ethnic group had the lion's share of plum jobs." End of quote. Who was being referred? Who said it and who was he referring to? "I bow and tremble before you, Father of national unity, who made sure that your ethnic group had the lion's share of plum jobs," says in the banks, in industry, and in government. Huh? Okay, so I'll go with my $1 million. You know who said it? I'm sure you think that they are talking about President Buhari. But this is an article written on the 20th of August 1993 by Ken Saro-Wiwa. Okay, this is to tell you how the more things change in Nigeria, the more they remain the same. Now, my argument then as now is that for us to cross the threshold, we need to have an idea about a future. And I will use two countries as an example, because I believe that stability, political stability, is a project, it's a science, it's an act. And a government that does not plan for how to secure its nation, and I'm not talking here about the military, no. I'm not talking here about guns, no. I'm talking here about the imagination to figure out whether by mythology, whether by art, to think a bit more clearly about how to unite a divided nation. When the president said, "I'm for everybody and for nobody," all of us clap. If you ask many Nigerians now, do they still feel so? I don't know. But don't give me an answer. But we are hemorrhaging because the centripetal forces are now pulling us in different directions. Now, the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989. And I used two examples. Two countries and how they responded to the end of communism. First is Yugoslavia. And listen very carefully, because we've got all the ingredients. And I say this not as a prophet of doom, but so that we become more circumspect. And those who think they can rely on might and power must think a little bit more creatively. Because democracy, the real essence of democracy is the ability and the capacity to create institutions of negotiation, consensus, cooperation, cooptation, or whatever the case may be. And we must understand that. And that people, citizens of this country, will have the right to speak, hopefully to be heard. But that right cannot be taken away. Amartya Sen said, democratic countries can never die of hunger. Because once you leave the channels of communication open, the media will do the job it's supposed to do. Now, Yugoslavia broke down, and it didn't succeed. Why? Yugoslavia, somebody said if you go to Google and Google hatred and Google Yugoslavia, you find the same thing. But that is because, I mean, the country exploded. 2 years ago, I was in... I had the good luck of visiting Sarajevo. I went to Sarajevo for a conference. And you ask yourself, could people have had this kind of bitterness? But what happened? We all hear of Milosevic. But Milosevic in 1980, before 89, in 1987, Milosevic was nobody. All that Milosevic did was he exploited an opportunity that was available, the disaffection of his people. And the Serbs had been bitterly opposed to the Muslims because despite what they consider, I mean, the fallout of the Ottoman Empire and so on, consequences of history. But there is a war that was fought which was literally 600 years old. And it is the memories of that 14th century war that on April 27, 1987, Milosevic addressed the Serbs. And one thing he said to them, he said, nobody will ever beat you again. And when he made those comments, I mean, when he said that single sentence, it resonated. Because he played on the sentiments, on the residual elements of unresolved hatred that existed between the Serbs and the Muslims. So by the time communism ended and Milosevic rose to power and we saw what happened and Yugoslavia fell apart, it's a lesson when we talk about the movement for Biafra or whatever it is. And that is why nothing can supersede the need for dialogue and greater communication. These are the kind of things Doe exploited. They are the kind of things Taylor exploited. They are the kind of things that Rwanda exploited. So I make the point because in the case of South Africa, in 1989, Mandela comes out of prison in 1990 on the 11th of February. But then before then, in 1986, the white liberals had begun to make a lot of effort. They went to Senegal to have a meeting. Those white liberals who believed that this system was not working enough and that it was not right. And I've said to my brothers, those who use ethnicity, those who use religion, it is from the liberals among them that people must come to terms with the fact that ethnic, regional, religious hegemonies can no longer deliver. Because at the end of the day, if that were the case, there will be no poor man in northern Nigeria today. There will be none. If mere monopoly of power is what is most important. Now Mandela had to think through and came up with the whole idea of the Rainbow Nation. How does he manage all this? And it's fascinating because when you also look at Mandela, you see how the international community fell in line with him and how the international community turned their back on Yugoslavia. So those of you who are sitting here and talking about ethnic nationalism, whether it's of the Ijo kind, whether it's of the Yoruba kind or the Igbo kind or the Fulani kind, you're wasting your time because there is no future for ethnicity as a category of self-expression. The world is never going to turn attention, no matter how big you may be, because times have changed. Now, Mandela and de Klerk had a simple characteristic that was important and is still important in politics, namely courage. And they had the courage to do what needed to be done. And we learned from Mandela the fact that if you continue to look at the past, it will haunt you, it will blind you, and the future will remain a blood destination. Now, when Mandela set up the TRC, it was not really meant to solve all the problems of the people of South Africa. No. But it gave people an opportunity. And I was lucky, we visited South Africa to see what exactly was happening, and we saw the reality. But imagine, and I think this is the challenge that President Buhari faces. Because during the campaigns, the president went everywhere, and I think one of the biggest challenges that the president faces is the challenge of the lack of visibility between himself and connection between himself and the people that he governs. And this is a reality we must face. Because one of the most dramatic things Mandela did was to visit a part of South Africa called Orania. And Orania is a part of South Africa where the whites who felt frustrated by the collapse of apartheid decided that they will create an area like Ikeja where no black man has ever been allowed to enter, unless you are a shoe shiner, a steward, a cook, a driver, or whatever. But there is no white man living, no black man living in Orania. And that is where the wife of Verwoerd, the founder of apartheid, that's where she had retired. She was 94 years old. That's where she was living. And no reasonable black African will imagine that an African president, if he didn't kill the white people, will waste his time talking to them. But Mandela, visiting her was one of the first things Mandela did. So, fate doesn't deal politicians the kind of hand that they expect. Therefore, I try to end by now talking about, and very briefly too, how do we heal our fractured nation? Now, again, Roosevelt said Let us never forget that government is ourselves and not an alien power over us. The ultimate rulers of our democracy are not a president and senators and congressmen and government officials, but the voters themselves. I think that is the challenge that we face. Now, we conclude by just taking a very brief look on, I take a quotation from a man called Gibran Khalil. Somebody, I'm sure many of you must have heard about him. He's a Lebanese born in America. But he said something, and I've quoted it publicly. He says, pity the nation that is full of beliefs and empty of religion. Pity a nation that wears a cloth it does not weave, and eats the bread it does not harvest, and drinks the wine that flows not from its own wine press. Pity the nation that is divided into fragments, each fragment deeming itself to be a nation. Well, for now, with the season of change, we haven't reached our destination yet. But after I sang last year, I got some favorable comments that people were actually beyond my mother ready to buy my record. So let me end with, I just singing only one verse of Jimmy Cliff again. Okay? Sitting here in limbo, but I know it won't be long. Sitting here in limbo, like a bird without a song. Well, they're putting up resistance, but I know that my faith will lead me on. Sitting in limbo, sitting in limbo. Bye-bye. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Thank you.